Our cool season lawns, bluegrass, fescue, and ryegrass, or mixes thereof, often become stressed. I won't be talking about the warm season lawns, but at the end, I'd be more than happy to respond to those kinds of questions. In order to struggle or to combat a struggle with that stress, these are the kinds of things that we use. The right plant, right place, we think about most commonly as with flowers and shrubs, but it's definitely applicable to turf grass as well. Fertilization is a key, one of the big three basics. Irrigation, another one, and we've been focusing on that again as a team lately a lot, the last 3 or 4 years. We always seem to be thinking about pests. One of the most basic things is mowing, and there can be a lot more to it than you think. Frequent inspection, scouting, and monitoring, and then if everything else fails, there's always reseeding and resodding. So those are the things we're going to be talking about. So from a right plant, right place standpoint, I like to think about, the surroundings and the sunlight exposure. And so we see a couple of images here that sort of help illustrate that. And on the right, we're primarily thinking about the term I learned from one of my predecessors. It used to be a coworker, and then it used to precede Ian, Kathleen. And Kathleen taught me the term dappled sun or dappled shade. And that's what we have, or filtered sun, filtered shade. And that's what we have here on the right, is you see poking through the trees, you see sun kind of getting to the turf. And of course, this is a change throughout the day. And then on the left, we have a similar kind of setting, but we also have a lot of blockage of airflow through this area. So it becomes kind of cloistered. And from a disease standpoint, that becomes a bit of an issue. So always looking at and asking the question, is this a good place for turf? Here we have a little bit more of an illustration, a different one. And it's quite variable from the top of the photo to the bottom of the photo and the left of the photo to the right. Very different. And I'm quite familiar with this particular site and situation. And if you look, there's a kind of it's actually a light pole at the very top. And around it, there are some lantana growing, which are sun-loving plants. And in the foreground, we have lemon balm, which will pretty much grow anywhere, and hostas doing quite well. So in a pretty short space, you have to think about, is turf grass the best place for this area? Here we have a competition issue being illustrated. And on the left, there's a lot of competition with this pin oak tree. And so turf is not competing well. John Ball, who's a professor at South Dakota State University, a professor of forestry, makes the comment quite often, whichever plant was there first, whether it be the turf or the tree, usually wins. And so in this situation, the tree was there first, and so it's doing quite well. As opposed to the right, which is kind of a sculpture garden, where there's very little competition. The shrubs and the ground covers compete a little bit, but the sculpture isn't offering any competition. So that can be a real consideration. Reflected and adjacent heat often causes a problem for us. It's hard to irrigate. There's a lot of heat that comes into a cool season turf from the left and the right, and really causes a problem with raising the soil temperature and drying out the roots. Incidentally, on the right-hand side, I did mention warm season grasses. One grass that tends to perform very well in this rough space is buffalo grass. And both Sarah and I have a lot of experience with buffalo grass, working on that in graduate school. And it's a unique grass, and it's a good plant in some places. So again, back to the right plant, right place theme. It might be a good choice, and a lot of times it's not a good choice. So you need to think that through. Slope. Here in River City, we have a lot of slopes. In fact, probably a much greater percentage of residential areas have slope as to those who don't. This is a dramatic slope. And so again, right plant, right place might not be a very good place for turf. Instead, maybe some sort of ground cover might be better, or tall ornamental grasses or other plants that would do much better than traditional turf grass. So right plant, right place is always a consideration. Is this a good area? Separating turf, full sun, turf tends to be kind of a full sun type of plant. And so always thinking that through before you just by default plant. The next basic one that we have, the turf grass basic, is fertilization. And we think of timing and rate and the amount when you put it on and how many applications you make. Quite often, it's real common to walk into a hardware store and see kind of a 4-step approach. And for the most part, that doesn't work out real well because you generally don't need all of those steps, and you sort of force yourself into buying it. It's like, well, I bought all this stuff, I might as well put it on. And you may or may not need all that stuff, usually not. And so this is kind of where we're at. When Sarah and I wrote the NEB guide, the current NEB guide for Eastern Nebraska and for Western Nebraska, we took a lot of this into consideration, when to apply what and how much to apply. And so that's easily available for you to download that information. We tried to make it into a user-friendly format. The first application of the year tends to be kind of late April, and it would be a light application. The reason for this is that we have a lot of microbial degradation or breakdown of the natural flora and fauna in the soil, the microbes in the soil. And so you think about it, first thing in the spring, you get the runoff water from the snow or the ice storms that you might have in late winter. Soil moisture is plentiful. The grass is green. Why in the world would you want to fertilize it and just cause yourself lots of mowing? That's the kind of the normal situation. So for the most part, we discourage early season application. By the time you get into mid to late May, that fertilizer potential has kind of started to run out. So an application of that time is well suited. Over the summer, for cool season turfs, we tend to avoid fertilization. We want them just green, and we don't want them to be overly stressed with lots of foliage to lose water from. At the end of the summer, the turf has been growing all summer. It's kind of stressed out. So a decent amount of fertilization in the late summer works well. And then we used to really encourage people to do late fall fertilization. And through research at the University of Nebraska and other land-grant universities, we've come to find that's really not a great time to do a lot of fertilization. So light fertilization at that point, if the lawn needs it, if that Labor Day application wasn't enough to get it back on its feet, or perhaps if you do some late season reseeding, a light fertilization would be called for. But these are the amounts that we're talking about. Now we're going to switch back and forth a little bit on the next few slides because they sort of go back and forth in terms of explanation. But a light fertilization followed by 2 moderate fertilizations and then another light one would be the considerations. You may not need the last one of the year or the first one of the year. And a lot of this is around math. Now, if you're of my generation, you may still do your own taxes. Or if you're as frugal as I am, you may still do your own taxes. So the reason I bring that up is that this is easier than your taxes, much easier, because it's a matter of working back and forth between the previous slide and this one and just doing a little bit of division and then multiplication. So it's pretty simple, especially with the modern cell phones where everyone has an app for the calculator on that. All right, so the first thing is you want to determine how much product you're going to put on 1,000 square feet. So that is back to the first one, is what time of the year are you in? Are we going to do a light fertilization, a moderate fertilization, or a heavy one? Very seldom would we do a heavy one, but you could if you wanted to, if there was a unique situation there. So step one would be to divide that amount that you desire per 1,000 square feet by the concentration of the product. So you got to think about two things here. The amount you desire, or the rate, divided by the concentration of the product. So in this situation, it's going to be maybe somewhere between a light and a moderate fertilization. We're going to take a 1/2 pound of nitrogen rate and divide that by the concentration of this specific product, which is 21% nitrogen. 21% of the contents of this fertilizer bag is nitrogen. And we're going to just divide. So 0.5 divided by 0.21 is 2.38, or roughly 2.5. And so that's 2.5 pounds of the product per 1,000 square feet. So if you think about 1,000 square feet, that's a 20 by 50 rectangle. It could get really complicated, and you might have to go back to high school geometry for a circle, which is pi r squared, which again is not very complicated, but you can get your high school sophomore to help you. Or if you're talking about squares, it's a little bit different. Triangles, again, it's a different formula. So all those different ones, you could work it out pretty simple. But squares and rectangles are the easiest, and for the most part, that's where we have lawn units. And then you determine how many 1,000 square foot units you have in your lawn. Now, most people have 5. But if you're really into vegetables or flowers, you may only have 3. Or if you really like turf, you may have 7. So it just depends. And again, it's just math, length times width, figuring out how many units you have. So that's it. So in this case, let's say you had, 4,000 square feet. You would multiply 2.5 times 4. And you would end up with, that would be your number of square foot units. So that would be roughly 10 pounds of this product for your lawn, for one application. The reason I'm sort of getting into this in this detail is very seldom are you going to buy a bag that only has 10 pounds of fertilizer in it. It would either have 16, 18, 25, whatever pounds of fertilizer. So you just need to weigh out 10 in order to give yourself that rate of a 1/2 pound rate. It's pretty simple, pretty straightforward, but it's really important. The reason is the human tendency is to open the bag, dump the entire bag into your fertilizer spreader, and set it on the spreader setting and just walk until you're done. Well, if you do that and the lawn is bigger than what you had in mind, you're going to end up with a lot of fertilizer still left in the hopper. Now, how many people, human nature being what it is, are going to go to the trouble of pouring the fertilizer back into the bag? Very few. What if you run out of product before you get to the end of the lawn? Well, then you need more. So this is a great way to know just how much fertilizer to put in the hopper. And you have to do a little experimentation to know how fast you're going to walk, where exactly you can set the spreader setting. But for the most part, in this situation, at least you know how much product needs to go on the lawn with any given application. The nice thing about this, you could use a red double spreader, a Fertilome spreader, a Bayer spreader, a Scott spreader, doesn't matter. On the particular spreader, you're going to be able to do the fertilization. Another thing in terms of how much or how often is along the lines of, the last time you went to a doctor or a lawyer or a carpet installer. It doesn't really matter. It depends. It depends on your expectations, for one thing. Do you want something lush, or do you just want something green? You don't care if there are a lot of weeds in it. You just need something green. Or do you want something in between? Well-established older lawns in the older parts of the town you live in need less fertilizer for several reasons. One is there's been a lot of stuff falling off of trees that is very desirable that decomposes and works its way down into the lawn, building up organic matter. And that organic matter is going to release nutrients throughout the year. And so you have to supplement with less. Newer lawns have been basically destroyed by the construction crew that built the home, and all that good organic matter has been ripped away. So new lawns will need more fertilizer. Another factor, and we'll see this coming up here soon, is the release rate of the nitrogen source. So we have slow release sources, we have quick release sources, we have combinations of quick and slow release sources. So how much and how often really depends on the release rate of the nitrogen source. Quicker release sources, you're going to want to use less product more often, and the slower release sources, you're going to want to use less often but more product. And then just realize no one size fits all. It would be nice if there's a one size fits all approach. It really depends on these factors: the expectation that you have or your neighbor has, right plant, right place, how much density is in your lawn right now versus how thin it might be, and then the tilth. We use that term to sort of relate back to the age of the lawn and how much organic matter is in it. Speaking of expectations, most people are going to need, that we encounter, that us as horticulturists here encounter, most people kind of need to lower their expectations. It honestly, after doing this a number of years, it takes a long time to really get to where you want to go. It can easily take 3 years of following good best management practices to really meet the expectations that you may have. As I mentioned, some of these sources, this is from our friend Brad Jacobowski. Everyone has a little bit better time, and some are slower and quicker release. The quicker release products here are ammonium sulfate and urea. The slower release materials would be there in the middle. And then the bottom two would be also slow release. The natural organic products like the chicken manures and milorganite and those kind of products are really good products, but they really need to be used when we have a long time for their release and when the soil temperature is high enough that the microorganism population is teeming and can help break it down. And if you're wondering, you might say, well, how do I know what I'm buying? Is it a quick or slow release? Well, a lot of times the clerk at the store can help you, but if not, then you just need to put on your reading glasses and find out what's in here. And again, ammoniacal, in this particular example, again, I'm going to put on my reading glasses. Ammoniacal nitrogen and urea nitrogen are quick release sources. And then you see like 4.5% water insoluble nitrogen, which is a slow release source. It's not insoluble, it's just slowly soluble. But you can see that. And then also you see there where it says it's derived from, it talks about those different slow release and quick release sources. So sometimes it's in pretty fine print and you just need to really read it. So on the left is sort of a graphical version, on the right is an actual photo I took a few years back, and you just need to look closely at it. So those are the fertilization suggestions that we have. And again, we have all that for you in the NEB guide. We're going to switch gears over to irrigation now. And we have two. Yeah, go ahead.
John, do you want to save all the questions to the end, or would you mind answering a couple fertilizer questions now?
Let's go with a couple questions.
Okay, so one question was, do more modern turf varieties require more frequent fertilization?
That would be, I would like to be able to say yes or no. There are both. There are some turf cultivars or varieties that are created or bred to be low maintenance varieties, like cemeteries might want. Or if you, again, your expectation is you want something green, you don't really need it to be lush. And then there are some types that are more really adapted well to places that want more vigorous turf, like a sports turf or a golf turf or a bank or insurance building, or if you just want thick turf. So really there's both, and you need to really dig into it. One source of that might be the digging into the National Turfgrass Evaluation Program, which is free and available online. So you could just use your favorite search engine to search for that. You may need to take that information and contact the company and find out, is this a more of a low maintenance or a high maintenance variety? And again, there are these research reports often have both. There'll be research reports that are just on the low maintenance cultivars and some that are concentrated on the high maintenance cultivars. Our university, about 40 miles to the west of where I'm sitting, participates in this National Turfgrass Evaluation Program, and we're very grateful that they do, because this is the kind of information that they find out. So the answer, I guess, is both.
Okay. How about, Kathy is asking, you mentioned late fall fertilization is not recommended. What about a winterizer product? She says in the Panhandle, we have a Jordan's winterizer that they apparently apply.
Okay,
I think Jordan's is a brand name. Okay,
that's a good question. And I used the term late fall, and I should have said or winterizer. So those terms are the same. Late fall and winterizer are the same. We used to recommend that because the lawns really greened up well from it. But there are problems with it. We're not really sure in all cases the fate of that nitrogen. Sometimes it can leach down below the roots and they don't absorb it. And so that's not good. And then sometimes it can volatilize. If you put on more fertilizer that can be absorbed, it may volatilize to the atmosphere. So that's not so good. So we've gotten away from that, and we don't encourage that anymore. However, if you have that product sitting on your shelf, you could just cross off the word winterizer, and then in a Sharpie, here I have a Sharpie right here, you could just write in the word summerizer. Because it's the same product and it would work really well for a June 1st through the 15th application. In fact, there's a garden center that's no longer in business here in Omaha, and they sort of tongue-in-cheek made up a bunch of product that they had their supplier make up a bunch of product for them, and they had on one side summerizer, the other side winterizer, and then they would just at the right time of the year turn the bags over and sell the product that way, depending on what they wanted to use. So we do recommend summerizer. We don't recommend winterizer.
So one more question, going back to your fertilizer math. If you make a mistake and you put down too much fertilizer, can you use water to wash that extra fertilizer out of the lawn, or could you rely on rain to dilute it so that it wouldn't burn the turf?
Good question. I would not rely on rain. The most important thing would, if you put on too much, is to wash it off the blades, because it can really dehydrate the blades of the grass. So you're hoping you don't put on way too much so that you're polluting down into below the roots. But you at the very least need to get it off the grass blades. Otherwise it's really going to burn.
Okay. Thank you, John. I think that's the questions we have right now.
Okay, well, we'll do the same thing. We'll do the irrigation section and then we'll stop. And we have two bottom lines. Sarah and I are going to present some of this information, but more of on a commercial setting here in about a month. And we are going to do the bottom two lines. The first thing we're going to stress is to water to the bottom of the roots. It's a good idea to know how deep the roots are, and it kind of changes. The next slide, we're going to show that it changes throughout the year, especially with cool season turfs. And I would relate a lot of this to your patio planters. I think as gardeners, most of us know that you want a little bit of water to drain out the bottom of the pot, maybe 10%. And you want roots all the way to the bottom of the pot. And in order to keep them moist, you got to water to the bottom of the roots. Otherwise, the bottom roots just dehydrate and die. So we want to water to the bottom of the roots as one sort of basic tenet. And then the next thing is to keep the soil moist and the roots moist, but not soggy and not dry. And we see mostly people overdoing the water. So we sort of even hesitate to mention moist because it means different things to different people. We see lots of muddy soils when people bring samples to our office, but at the same time, we also see lots of powdery or concrete hard soils. So keep the soil moist, but don't overdo it. And what I have here in the illustration is to do some frequent checking with the screwdriver. The screwdriver test is a great way to know how much moisture is in the soil. It's also good for, again, the aforementioned patio planter. But this is, following these bottom two lines are really going to help. As I mentioned before, cool season turfs tend to be having roots that are deep in the spring and fall and shallower in the summer. Now, the reason for this is that the soil temperatures heat up and then the roots just naturally shrink as the soil temperature heats up. But there's also a cyclical nature to it. Again, as I mentioned at the research facility we have here near Mead, Nebraska, we had a really cool root observation chamber. And a number of researchers did a lot of neat experiments there. And they noticed that based on the previous work done by James Beard from Michigan State and later at Texas A&M University, documented that all cool season grasses have kind of a cyclical nature, and you're sort of having to adapt to that in terms of root depth, that is. And some of it is root depth by soil, influenced by soil temperature, and some of it is just genetics, that even if the soil temperature isn't real high, that you just get a summer dieback. So you wouldn't want to water real deeply beyond the roots because that's wasted, but you want to water all the way to the bottom so that you keep all those hydrated so the roots don't die back. And just know that in the spring, summer, and fall, it's going to be a little different. So deep and infrequent watering is something we tout and really pound home that message. But in the middle of the summer, if the roots aren't as deep, then you're going to need to do a little bit more light and frequent watering to match that root depth. And so those two tenets are the biggest things: water to the bottom of the roots and also moist, not soggy. I always quickly add not soggy to that because people kind of misunderstand. But that screwdriver will really, really help you. There are lots of factors that influence soil moisture. The first one is thatch. And we see that for the tip of that knife blade all the way up to where the thumb is, that area in between kind of looks like shredded wheat. The shredded wheat I grew up with, at least, not the little chunky pellets that are so convenient to eat now. But there's just it's like a thatch roof, and it's just a natural consequence of the rhizomes growing and sloughing off the covering they have, the sheath that they have, and old crowns that die that are really tough. They just sit there and they don't break down. And so you have this thatch buildup. Well, if you put water on a lawn with heavy thatch, it has a great tendency to run off. And so that's something you could check from time to time. You get a hunting knife or a shovel and you see what the thatch layer is. The thatch is not the leaves that you may find on the surface. The thatch is this brown shredded wheat-like material. The slope has a big factor. This is in kind of the, I think, oops. We'll have to, I forgot to, there we go. Okay, kind of the cardinal sin. I'm sorry, it's almost like your cell phone going off. I feel bad about that. Kind of the Midtown Dundee part of Omaha where everybody has a slope. And so watering kind of in the face where those coreopsis are on the left, kind of in that part, the water is going to run down. And that's a kind of a scary thing. We don't really want that. It's not scary like it's monster scary, but it's problematic in that it's going to be really hard to keep the face of that slope moist. In order to deal with that, we have a strategy called soak and cycle or delayed starts. And you can use that if you the most basic of irrigation systems have that setting where you can do the start times, the run times, all of that kind of thing. We also encourage people who have slopes to aerate. That really helps to give you better irrigation infiltration. And then also uniformity of distribution of the water, which we're going to talk about at a length coming up. Wind and evaporation. Watering between 5 and 10 is going to greatly reduce both. You usually have much less evaporation at that time of day and usually less wind. So watering when there's less wind and less evaporation will help a lot with efficiency. Shade and sun, note the area. If you're in full sun, this is a good landscape from a turf standpoint in that it's separated from the ornamental, so there's no competition there or less competition there. However, it is full sun, so the evapotranspiration or the draw of water to the atmosphere is going to be much greater than it is in the shade. So noting that will help in terms of how to replenish water and how to irrigate. So noting how much sun is in that area. It's very different in this landscape than in what I was showing you in the very first slide that we showed with that dappled sun. The soil type has a big influence. And again, our friend Brad supplied this image for us. If you have a sandy soil or a clay soil, big difference. The clay is going to retain and be very slow in its absorption of water, whereas the sand is going to allow the water to go very quickly. So a lot of people have one or the other or a mix that we call silt. And again, you just need to know, it's a good idea to do a test on this and just so irrigate your lawn, come back out later and see what happened to the water. Digging a hole in the middle of the lawn, see how far it's soaked in, like you see in the bottom image there is a great idea. And just knowing that soils have a differing capacity to absorb irrigation water. A lot of times the age has a lot to do with it. In the upper left image, a lot of us have driven through the newer parts of the town you live in and see this, as I mentioned before, this destruction of the topsoil. It's scraped off, moved somewhere else. The heavy equipment drives across the bare soil. And then afterwards, it's really hard to grow a lawn because on the left, you see the destruction. On the right, you see the puddling of water that you get right in the middle of the new sod that's been laid over the compacted soils. And so that's an age issue, as opposed to the two bottom images, which are on older soils, 40, 50-year older soils, where you don't have that. The soil doesn't have as much compaction. The water runs in more easily. And here's that compressing or the compacting of the soil that we see, where in the back image there, the back part of the image on the right, a new concrete pad was added to this landscape. And unfortunately, the concrete delivery trucks ran over this area repeatedly, and I doubt they'll be able to grow a lawn there for a while because all these soil particles have been jammed together through that. Natural rainfall, you think about it, our efforts to irrigate are supplemental to natural rainfall. If you're not familiar with this source, this is again another free source from this is from the National Drought Mitigation Center. This map comes out every 2 weeks, and across the state from east to west, north to south, and actually all across the country, you can get these maps. And this is quite different than the normal pattern. Someone mentioned the Panhandle. Usually this is quite the opposite, East Nebraska, Western Nebraska. And usually the Panhandle is kind of in that dark red zone. But this spring, here in February, it was not. And so we kind of had moderate drought in Eastern Nebraska and no drought in Western Nebraska. This is the most current map right now. And again, we're starting to get a little bit of drought in Western Nebraska, a little bit near North Platte, and a little bit in the southeast. But this is good just to check in on from time to time. And I think it's just drought.unl.edu. And you can go to the recent Drought Mitigation Center maps. 7 different weather organizations collaborate to put this information together, and it is quite informative. I mentioned before separating turf and ornamentals, and here we have the co-location of turf and ornamentals, which is a problem. Here the irrigation sprinkler system is smashing this tree and distorting the spray pattern, so you're not getting good distribution and you're probably harming the tree. And on the right, the tree died because of over-irrigation and because of the co-location of turf and ornamentals. So wherever possible, set them apart. It would have been much better to have the tree on the side of the landscape as opposed into the middle of the grass. The performance, the irrigation distribution uniformity, or just the performance of the device, whether it's in ground, automatic, or it's something you hook up to the hose. It doesn't matter. You can do really well with both types, or you can do very poorly with both types. It just depends on whether it's this is on the left, we have kind of a manually operated impact head, and on the right, an in-ground automatic geared rotor. So they both can work just fine, and they both can be bad for the bad for the performance as well. What we're talking about here is the potential to have, when you have non-uniform applications, non-even applications, to have problems. And there's sort of early and advanced symptoms here. You may be able to see that. And you can sort of expect it. So if we have in the upper left irrigation head, and on the upper right an irrigation head, and then all around it, in the very dead center of it, you have the dead zone, or the area that may not be getting as much water because the water isn't getting there uniformly. And on the right, you can see this very, the middle of end of July, you can see this really, really well. So that's kind of how it happens. And it can be really weird, the distortion of that. And again, one of our programs deals with that. It's always good to measure the output of the irrigation system you use, again, whether it's manual or automatic or in ground or above ground. Again, the screwdriver test, or anything long metal object you can stick in the ground, that's kind of a hand weeder, that works really well, or a screwdriver. That works really well, a simple screwdriver test. Or you can actually measure it with a tuna can, or what we've been using lately are these stakes and collection cups. Either way, you want to measure how much water is going out, so you know if it's getting out uniformly and evenly across the irrigation system. Here, we're doing this in a front lawn. We have both. We're using both the irrigation cups and the catch cans, both the tuna cans and the pre-measured collection cups. And so we've set them out at the head, well, 3 feet away from the head, and then halfway in between the heads, so that we know, how's that dead zone doing? How's that area in the middle of all the spray heads doing? And so doing this just from time to time, if you don't eat tuna, you can buy these collection cup measuring devices online. I think I paid about $40 for a set of them. And it gives you very valuable information in order to know how uniform your system is. These are called audits, not the kind of audit you get from the IRS, but the first step is just to turn it on and watch it run. You will notice big flaws. And so the idea is to fix the obvious flaws, like you see in the upper photo, where there's a bent head. Someone ran over the head with a car, probably, and now it's not spraying water where it's supposed to. So you fix the obvious flaws, and you fix the biggest ones first, and then measure the output with a can or the ruler. Sorry. Turn it on and you fix the obvious flaws first. You don't even need to measure. Then you run the system again to do the measuring, and then you might find some more subtle flaws. And that usually means making an adjustment or replacing a part. Maybe a head doesn't rise up at all, or maybe it's bent, or maybe it's spraying in the street only, or something like that. So you make adjustments and then remeasure in order to give yourself a little bit of fine tuning. One last step that we don't always talk about, but I think would be helpful for the people who are tuned in today, is to do a trim. Let's say you run your system in a particular zone, or you hook it up to the hose and set a timer while you're inside cooking supper or cooking breakfast. Not supper, you'd be cooking breakfast. My bad. And then you come back a half an hour later. Okay, so then it's time to turn it off. You do the screwdriver test. You see how far it's soaked in. Well, you could probably easily trim the 30 minutes down to 27 minutes. And you probably aren't going to notice much of a reduction in turf quality. Yet, that drop from 30 to 27 is a 10% reduction in runtime. So you're putting out less water. So you probably can save a little bit water by just using a 10% trim. And then, of course, adjusting it during the season is going to make a difference. So we call our program the Water Dogs program. We have master gardeners involved. These are the basic steps of it, of running the system manually and watering only when needed. And then monitoring the different soil moisture levels through the various methods. Turning the system to that setting that says off. And using an irrigation system, but if you set it on the regular cycle, you're going to have what we see in the bottom photo happening. As I was driving to work one day, I saw as much water coming down from the sky as I did being put on the lawn. And so that's kind of a shame. We talk about soak and cycle, watching it run, measuring the output and the uniformity, making adjustments, using good equipment, and then calling the irrigation company. Some of the other things that you may need to make adjustments on is like if there's a fence, your neighbor puts up a fence, you may need to make an adjustment. At the base of the arrow or the tip of the arrow, you see dead turf. And that's there because 3 times as much water is not being hit because it's being diverted and dropped down from the fence. You can see the arc of the irrigation pattern there. And then, trees grow, shrubs grow, and a lot of times they can grow over the top of the head. And obviously that's going to cause a problem. But a lot of these things you can fix for yourself. I know Ian is quite handy with the tools on fixing irrigation systems. He and I did some video work for Backyard Farmer. And he had a whole cadre of tools that he was using for fixing things. So I appreciate his capacity there. And then, of course, if you can't, then there are lots of irrigation companies that you can also use. All right. Any questions on any of the irrigation things?
Yes, we do have one, John, and this is an area where a lawn is getting too much water. It's a 3-year-old lawn where a sump pump empties on the south side of a house. Is there anything a homeowner can do to help the turf from becoming so wet that it sloughs off if someone walks on it or a mower goes over it? Or are there any low-growing plants that could absorb lots of water?
My instinct there is to that be a non-turf area, right plant, right place. I would think that going to some of the plants, maybe make a rain garden. I know that Kelly has a lot of experience and knowledge on those kinds of things. Or maybe not a whole full-blown rain garden, but just a grouping of plants that tolerates wetter conditions. I think you can fiddle around with doing lots of things with a lawn and still not have effect. Aerating that area a few times might be one step you could do before switching out the plants. But I think you might be headed down the right plant, right path, right plant, right place path instead of trying to keep the lawn there.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
That's the only irrigation question we have right now that hasn't been answered.
Okay. Well, thank you for answering those along the way.
Okay.
We're just going to do a few simple pests here. Crabgrass and dandelions. Those are the ones that we tend to struggle with the most. Literally, the ones that I see the most as samples. Crabgrass, you put on a pre-emergence herbicide in late April, and then sometimes a second one in late or early June. That a lot of times those are combined with fertilizer and sometimes not. One strategy that is commonly used is a light application, and kind of fitting with what the turf needs in terms of fertilizer. A light application in late April, and then a light application this time of year. And that does a good job of controlling foxtail, spurge, and crabgrass. Bugs, the 2 bugs I see the most are grubs and billbugs. And you can see, obviously, the grubs eat the roots, and so you can just pull it up like carpet. If you've never done it before, it's quite shocking to just grab a piece of grass and pull it up and then see all these land shrimp underneath. And the billbugs are a little bit more confusing. If you grab a hold of it like you would your hair and try to pull, you're pulling out your hair because your hair's on fire sometimes, it's going to break right off in your hand. Where the billbug, it's almost like a a turfgrass borer. If you're familiar with the emerald ash borer or other borers of trees, it's going to be the same thing, only it's a turfgrass plant. It's going to eat the inside of the turfgrass plant out, and so they just break right off in your hand. These are the two insects I see the most. And so if you see these kinds of symptoms, you might be dealing with that as a pest. We also have fungus. There are about 12 different kinds of fungus that we have, at least in eastern Nebraska. The two most common ones I see are summer patch and dollar spot. On the left, we see summer patch, which are big dead areas, sometimes with a little ring of green in the middle of it. And then the dollar spot, I see, you have to look real close at the turfgrass blades. And you see kind of green, ashy brown, bleach, back to green. So these patches. Sometimes you get brown patch, and that's almost exclusively on tall fescue. It looks almost the same. I mean, it looks different, but it looks a lot like dollar spot that you see on bluegrass and ryegrass. So it's quite similar. Those are the most common fungus problems we have. So weeds, bugs, and fungus. In terms of pests, those are the ones that we see the most commonly. We're kind of short on time, so we'll get into mowing real quick. Mowing might seem simple, but it's not. We tend to encourage people to follow the 1/3 rule, which is to mow so that you're never taking off 1/3 of the foliage. Now, one neighbor of mine does the 1 monthly rule, mows monthly, and the other neighbor does weekly, whether it's the middle of July or the middle of April. It doesn't really matter. He just mows weekly. And of course, as we saw before in one of the slides, the grass doesn't grow evenly throughout the year. In April, May, and June, it grows much quicker than it does in July and August, and then it starts growing more quickly again in the fall. We encourage about a 3-inch mowing height, 3.5. And the biggest reason for this is the more shoots you have, the more roots you have. The taller the height of cut, the more roots you end up with. And the other factor is that it's a sunlight blocker. And the more you have sunlight being blocked, the fewer weeds you have. So those are important. The other thing is a sharp mowing blade. If you're driving up after work and you notice kind of a bronzy cast to the lawn pretty uniformly, it probably means you just need to take your mower blade off and take it to the mower shop and have them sharpen it, or put it in a bench vise like this and sharpen it yourself with a file. Either way. Then scouting and monitoring is something you need to do weekly. Go out and take a look and see what's out there and what is going on here. Dig down deep, get on your hands and knees and see what's there. Take a good look. And what am I looking at? You want to catch these pests early on in the season rather than after they're full blown. All right, then if all else has failed, we're going to talk about renovation, or what I call languishing lawns. The first step to do is an irrigation audit. See how evenly your irrigation system or your above ground irrigation system is working. Think back to the bottom 2 lines of irrigation, water to the bottom of the roots, and keep them moist, not soggy. Most people overwater. Do a right plant, right place check. The number of hours of sunlight. Do a pest check. Identify and fix insect and disease problems. You may have abiotic maladies, which are the things we've talked about: slope and compaction and reflection and heat and that kind of stuff. And then just ask yourself, how bad is it? I mean, can I tolerate this? It's not perfect, but can I tolerate this? Or do I need to really make a change? Sometimes people use about a 50-60% rule there. If 50 to 60% or 70% of the lawn is good, well, maybe that's good enough. Or maybe it's not. If your expectation is it be pretty, 90%, well, then you need to renovate. So what we talk about here is aerating and power raking extensively and renovating, but we also talk about considering changing turf species. And you're going to try to do that. So if you want to change turf species, then you're going to need to kill the existing grass you have with glyphosate and do some reseeding. And so here's an area that we killed with glyphosate because we had a lot of brown patch in this area and bill bugs both. So it was like, well, this is going to be easier just to kill with glyphosate, power rake, and reseed. Now, most people don't really understand power raking. You need to get it, like if you're a vegetable gardener and you're going to plant carrots and radishes, you need to get it to look like that. And so that's what you use, is this device on the left, and you get it to look like the photo on the right, so that you open up the seed bed for the new turf seed to fall into. Then you need to buy high quality seed. And that's where this NTEP that I referred to earlier comes into play. You can go online and do a search under the National Turfgrass Evaluation Program, and you can buy the latest varieties that have very little weed seed or crop seed in them and that have performed well under those tests. And then my daughter actually gave me this phrase, which I kind of like. Well, first of all, it's pounds per square feet, the number of recommended pounds per square feet, just like it is when you go to fertilize. But she gave me the phrase, well, it's more like sprinkles on a cupcake, isn't it? Well, yeah, as opposed to a frosted cupcake or frosted chocolate cake. It's not like that. A lot of people put out too much seed because they think more is better, just like more of anything is better. But no, it's really more like sprinkles on a cupcake. That gives you a visual that can be helpful to you. If you're doing starter fertilizer, I would recommend this one. It's not that we get a kickback from the Scott's company or anything, but this contains mesotrione, and it works well to hold down the crabgrass, especially if you're going to be seeding in the late summer, which is about the time you're going to want to be doing that. Be careful, again, more isn't better. This is turf that has been killed, new seedling plants that have been killed by too much mesotrione. That can be a problem. So follow the label directions. Do not apply more than is required or more than is indicated, because you'll end up with kind of, well, it's pretty. I think mauve is pretty, but it's not going to turn into desirable turfgrass plants. Then keep it moist, not soggy and not dry. New seed needs to be kept a little on the moist side of moist. Established turf needs to be kept on the dry side of moist. And I know that's a little ambiguous, but that's, there is a degree of success there. And then 1 month later, you'll end up with this. So on the left, you see a small area, probably 2 or 3 feet square, that has been reseeded. And on the right, a whole front lawn that's been reseeded. So that's what you're going to end up with.